Hello, welcome back to A Boring Revolution, your number one news source for everything in regards to the Boring Company. Hope you're all well. I have had a few messages from a few people over the last couple of days talking about the robustness of the Boring Company system to extreme weather events. More specifically, heavy rainfall, tsunamis, monsoons, that kind of thing. And an interesting discussion with one of those people, and I'm kind of in agreement. I think this topic needs discussing, so I thought, why not do a very quick video today, just having a look at that particular topic. So the question is, are Boring Company tunnels weatherproof? Now, it's an interesting point in that it's very, very difficult to discuss how weatherproof a system is until it's actually built, until you can actually see the details. And really, being brutally honest, I don't think the Boring Company system is weatherproof. But then again, is anything immune to extreme weather? I can think of many examples here in the UK of where train lines, tram systems, bus systems have been closed down for many hours, if not days, because of extreme weather, roads being closed because of weather damage, extreme snowfall, ice, that kind of thing. But if we're looking at Las Vegas specifically, and we're talking about extreme rainfall, which does happen from time to time, you might think, hey, it's basically a desert, but they do have this extreme rainfall, 3, maybe even 4 times a year. How is it going to affect the Boring Company system, and how can we mitigate those effects or even prevent the system being closed at all? So trains, buses, trams, bicycles, roadways are subject to closure in extreme rainfall. If you get 10 inches of rainfall in an hour, I guarantee you that everyone's going to be stuck, because that is excessive. But how often does it get that bad? Probably extremely rare. So you get these kind of weather events where you're getting 4 or 5 inches of rainfall in an hour, and is that going to close the system? So no mode of transport is immune to extreme weather events. All well-built infrastructure should be resistant to intense rainfall. When you're going through the design process, when you're thinking about where you site your stations, where you site your ventilation shafts, where you site your ramps, your elevators, that kind of thing, you need to think about this particular topic and how you can eliminate the possibility of flooding or severely mitigate the effects of extreme rainfall. Any system is only as strong as its weakest link. Ultimately, if you have an area of your system that is it potentially might even be below sea level if you're in certain countries or certain regions, that's your weakest link. If you have a ramp in that area, if you have a ventilation shaft and it gets inundated with water, no submersible pump is going to save you. No kind of barrier is going to be able to put up in time to resist, because ultimately those areas are open for a reason, because you need to get vehicles in, you need to get air into your system, you need to get passengers out of the system. If passengers' vehicles can get in, then I guarantee water is going to get in as well. So all kind of stems from this particular article, which was written by someone called Brian Kahn. Now, I could go into it because he seems a little bit anti-Elon Musk, but to be fair, the kind of content of the article does go over a topic that is relevant. So Elon Musk is finding his ways to keep busy, blah, 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 blah. He weighs his offer to buy the Twitter. This includes espousing the virtues of tunnels as immune to surface weather conditions. I think that's a very strong statement, I'm going to be honest. I'm very much in agreement with Elon Musk 98.5% of the time, but I think on this instance you've got to be careful saying things like that, because no transport system is immune to very heavy rainfall. This is perhaps no worse example of this than subways. Just last summer, New York subway dealt with stations flooding multiple times. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, guys, when the station is at the same level as the street outside it, and you have heavy rainfall. ultimately that water is going to find its way down the stairway into the subway. To some extent, that's because the subways were not designed to kind of mitigate the effects of heavy rainfall, heavy snow, heavy storms coming through those areas. Here's the tweet in question. So, underground tunnels are immune to surface weather conditions. It's kind of true to an extent. Certainly, if you've got a long tunnel and you've not got no breaks in that particular tunnel, but you are going to have breaks in that particular tunnel for various reasons. So it's hard to kind of agree with that statement. I think a better term would be underground tunnels are heavily resistant to surface weather conditions. That would be a better term, but it doesn't sound as good as immune. So let's just say the obvious thing: all subways flood. As you can see, you have a heavy downpour, you have a storm, blowing in. You're going to get these kind of flooding incidents. Is Las Vegas any different? It essentially is in a desert, but no. I've been reading articles for years about these kind of storm drains, these flood channels that exist all over Las Vegas, and homeless people live in there, and there have been dozens of examples of homeless people asleep in these flood channels, and there's been heavy downpour, and ultimately they've got seriously injured or even died, and it's a very, very sad state of affairs, really. But these flood channels have been built for very good reason, in that they do get these heavy rainfall events fairly regular, to be frank with you, and as you can see from the map down below. Excuse me, 1 second. It's doing that. Okay, we're not going to do that. Okay, so what I'll do with this is I'll just pull up my pen. As you can see down here, we have some very, very extreme rainfall. The areas in dark red, purple, extremely heavy rainfall. And that falls over a very short period of time. Ultimately, that's going to cause you problems, and that's why they have these drainage channels everywhere, so that they can keep that water out of the casinos, off the road, and keep roads open. There are still instances where they have, 4 or 5 inches of water blocking various roads for large areas, acres and acres of roadway. So even with these channels, there's still issues. You could make a very, very good argument that they should expand the number of these channels. However, it's very, very difficult now to kind of build more channels in a very built up kind of area such as Las Vegas. Potentially the Boeing company could help them with that, but as you can see from this example up top, the actual road is at this kind of level, and then you've got just underneath it this channel here. That is not too dissimilar from our kind of reception shaft here for the Resorts World, where the road is here, and then it's actually even lower. So the actual tunnel for the Boeing company is sat at around, I don't know, let's say 2 to 3 foot below the road level here in this area, because it's coming up. So ultimately you've got to look at that and say, hey, there's a risk here. There's a risk of water ingress in this area. In the long term, obviously this area will be covered up with a concrete slab, and ultimately, hopefully, if that is sealed correctly, you shouldn't get any water ingress. But unfortunately, these poor people down here who are living in these flood channels, they're going to be exposed to heavy rainfall, and in the event that Boeing company tunnels do get flooded, I would guess that they would pump that water into these channels or into systems or drainage areas that feed into these channels. So very, very difficult problem to basically people shouldn't be in there. You're going to have to clean out those areas. But simple solution is that you drain the water out as quickly as possible. These channels, by the way, are quite large. They're about 16 foot wide by about 10 foot deep. So in terms of moving water out very quickly, they're going to be very good at that. So you shouldn't have lots of flood water for long periods of time blocking your tunnels, but it will be there. So let's get into the meat and bones of this whole thing. So here is the Las Vegas Convention Center Central Station. As you can see, it sits at ground level. There's no kind of slab isolating it. In the event of a flood in this area, water would simply just go down the escalator or go down this lift shaft here. So it's not great. There's an easy way to protect this system, in that you would have some kind of step, as it were, or ramp. You'd have to have a ramp because you'd have to have wheelchair access, where it would basically sit on some kind of concrete slab around, let's say 150 millimeters, or around 7 inches above the ground around it. You'd have ramp access so that everyone can access it, and then in the event that there is some kind of flash flooding, water wouldn't make its way into the state. It's an easy solution. That you don't want to get into the business of, well, it's going to flood anyway, so we might as well pump it out. Well, you might as well prevent it, but the prevention is better than the cure, as they say. So there's an easy solution to that. Another question that you might ask is, well, what is the topography of the land like here in this area? It might be that this is elevated above, there might be a fall here and there might be a fall here, and it might be elevated anyway, so you might not need those measures. You could simply just make it slightly higher than the land around it, and that would resolve that particular issue. So it's a fairly simple solution, but you need to think of this in the design phase before you build it. The weak spot, the area that I worry about the most with the Boring Company systems, is these ramps. These ramps are like rapids in terms of water could filter into the system. Again, it's a simple solution. There's two parts to it, but you need to be thinking about this before you design the system. So here's your ramp. As you can see, the ramp of the road deck, which is this here, finishes exactly the same level as the exterior parking bay or exterior road. And that's not what you want to do, really. Ideally, you'd want to have underground stations and then you have them covered up. But in some circumstances, you're going to have surface stations and you're going to have these ramps here, certainly in Las Vegas. So you need to bring that road deck out beyond the tunnel and have it sit at a level about 150 millimeters, around 7 inches above the existing ground or the finished floor level outside, and that would prevent the vast majority of water from going into the system. It's that easy. In terms of the comfort of vehicles driving in and out, it shouldn't really affect it that much. So as a solution, that's fairly easy to implement. Another means of doing it, as you can see here, we have these parapet walls that run alongside the ramp. You obviously could have external walls around the station itself, and that wouldn't be too difficult to do, and then have kind of a bit of a pit where the station sits, and that would prevent the vast majority of water from ingressing if it's falling on the streets. Another obvious thing that you'd need to do is have some kind of cover above the ramp. It doesn't need to cover the entire ramp, but it needs to prevent water from kind of washing down. But really, that's the least of your problems. What you're worried about is water building up on the roads in and around this area and then kind of coming around and going down. You don't want that. So you want some kind of protective retaining wall around the entire station. Otherwise, you just want your road deck to finish at this kind of level, and then you'd have some kind of ramp which would go down here. It wouldn't need to be that long. It only need to be 2 to 3 foot long, and it only need to be 7 inches higher than the land around it. We have these kind of ventilation shafts that I've seen for the Boring Company, and it looks like this is how they're going to do it in large parts of the Las Vegas Loop. Again, this is potentially an area which could get engulfed with flood water. Again, you want to raise the kind of levels that these landings terminate at. This landing here should terminate above this land here. You want kind of a slab that sits about 150 mil above the land, and then you'd have some kind of ramp here, ideally. And then obviously, again, you want a cover. You want some kind of cover above this. Even if it doesn't cover the majority of it, I mean, you want it to cover 60 to 70% of this, and then you want the water basically to fall away from this ventilation shaft here. Potentially they could have ventilation shafts going into the tunnels themselves. That is another risk as well, because if they are, I have a funny feeling they will put vent shafts in the middle of roads, because they're going to run the tunnels underneath the existing right of way. Therefore you need to have them elevated slightly, and then that obviously comes with issues in that what happens if that road gets engulfed with water. You may need some kind of system where you can close off those ventilation shafts. But if they do end up building it like this, that would be a bit easier to protect, because you're not on the roadway, and you can elevate this 150 millimeters or around 7 inches, and you're not going to have problems, and then cover it. You can have some kind of pitched roof that covers over there. Okay, so that's fairly simple. Like I say, there's no cover, it's exposed to the elements. I feel in a way that we're making a big deal out of something that's quite small, because this is only happening 2 or 3 times a year. If the system gets closed for a few hours 2 to 3 times a year, it's no real big deal. But what you want to do is have this system open when all other modes of transport are out of action, and then people will migrate to the system, and it will come across as reliable in comparison to the surface roads. And that can be done with these solutions by thinking about how water can make its way into the system, and how you can raise the various entry and exit points above the level that water will probably get to. Ultimately, you could raise it 150 mil and then the water ends up 200 mil, but you've reduced the amount of water going into your system by 75% doing that, and that's going to be a lot easier to pump out. So you need to be doing these things. So just to kind of summarize, these are kind of my thoughts about how I would do it if I was designing the system, or trying to assess the designs that are already being proposed for the Las Vegas Loop. So the intersection between the ventilation shafts and the tunnel crown, or the surface roads, you need to think, is that a weak point? Is water potentially going to come in those areas? How can we eliminate water going in? How can we reduce the impact of any water that's going to go in there? And how can we mitigate those kind of effects? Topography of land in and around the site. Ideally, you don't want to be building in areas that are lower than the land around them, because essentially that's like a giant funnel. So if you're building on land that's 80 meters above sea level and the land around it is 82 meters above sea level, for me, that's a big no-no, unless you're going to have some kind of a grade adjustment there. Ideally, you want your site to be higher than the land around it. Are storm drains located within close proximity of the site? As I understand, Las Vegas has a lot of storm drains. They are pretty much everywhere. If you know where to look, they are pretty much everywhere. That's going to be useful for the Boeing company. They can then have the sump pumps located in the road deck there, and then you can pump that water out almost as quickly as it's coming in if you have enough sump pumps. So you want to either site it next to storm drains, or have some kind of additional connection to those storm drains that you can then utilize. So that will probably eliminate the need for closing the system, 95% of the time, if you can do that. So that is an important one, if you can kind of integrate that, and they should be able to integrate that. How high is the road deck compared to the vehicle parking bays? If you've got a surface station, ideally you want the parking bays to be situated below the actual height of the road deck, and you have some kind of ramp there to go in and go out. So that's going to, again, prevent the vast majority of water from making its way down the ramp into your tunnels. Do open areas have sufficient cover protect from heavy rainfall? You need to cover these areas. You don't necessarily need to cover the entire area, but you need to have some kind of like covering, either some kind of pitched roof or mono pitched roof, or even like a slightly flat roof with a slight gradient on it. Can tunnels be quickly and reliably drained during a flood event? You need to have plenty of sump pumps, you need to have backup power, potentially via Tesla Powerwalls, and you need to have those sump pumps in areas that you assess to be at high risk of flooding or are low points in the system. So you might have an area where you're going under a particular, you might be going under another tunnel, and that area is obviously a lot lower than the rest of the system, so then you're going to situate your sump pump just underneath the road deck in there. Okay, so that's kind of like the summary, as it were. In terms of like how I weigh up the risk of flooding for the Boring Company in Las Vegas, it's fairly low anyway. It's just people seem to have a lot of interest in this particular topic. I think there's a lot of measures that we could introduce to kind of severely reduce the probability of flooding, way below like 2 to 3% probability of flooding in any given year. But they are additional costs. Are the Boring Company going to foot those costs, or are they just going to say, well, the risk is so low, we don't need to worry about it? That's my worry, is that they'll just say, hey, the risk is so low, we don't need to think about this, let's just forget about it. There's no kind of regulations covering this, and there'll be a big flood in 2 to 3 years' time, and everyone will make a big deal about it. But hey, I'm not worried about it. I think that they should hopefully consider what the risks are in a world where we're having more extreme weather events. Okay, so thanks for tuning in. Please like this video, then comment on the video. You don't necessarily need to comment on what you've seen in the video. Just put, hey, love the video, or thanks for making the video, or something like that, and that helps with the algorithm. Please consider following us on Twitter, Discord, and Patreon. All my Patreons, as per usual, thanks for supporting the channel. I really do very much appreciate your help. Recently, the money that has come in through Patreon has funded some acoustic panels in this office/studio, and hopefully you are benefiting from a better sound quality. Tell me about sound quality in the comments below. Yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. Have a good day, and I will see you on the next one. Remember, guys, don't be boring. Hope you have a beautiful day. Goodbye.
Hail to the king, baby. お前はもう死んでいる。何？